we are now pleased to be joined by City Park Maintenance Supervisor Dave Hansen. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Well, as happy as we are to have you here, the topic that we're going to talk about today isn't exactly a positive one. Emerald ash borer has been a presence in Minnesota for a number of years now, and recently it's crept even closer to Bloomington. Why don't you start by telling us what emerald ash borer is for those who don't know?
Emerald ash borer is an insect from Asia, Eastern Asia. It was first discovered in 2002 in Detroit, Michigan. It's a pest of ash trees. It has no native predators in the United States, and so there's no natural check for it, and the population get quite big.
Okay, so from its time in Michigan, it's slowly kind of crept across the Midwest, and you know, in its adult stage, the insects are pretty harmless, but it's in its larva stage that they're deadly. Let's talk about how ash trees are killed once they're infested with emerald ash borer.
You're right. While the adults are out in the summer moving around, the larvae are like little grubs inside the tree, and they feed on the inner bark, making tunnels, and those tunnels interrupt the flow of nutrients and water throughout the tree and eventually kill the whole tree.
Okay. Well, emerald ash borer has not been detected in Bloomington as of today, but recently it was found very close to Bloomington. Talk about the most recent findings.
Yeah, it was found at Fort Snelling, which is roughly 2 miles from the border of Bloomington. We knew this was not an if thing. We knew it was going to be here eventually. It's just a matter of when. This represents a big jump of probably 5 miles from its closest previous infection. And it may mean that because it is this close, those people that were considering treating their trees and haven't done so yet might want to reevaluate their plans and go ahead with that.
Okay. You know, oftentimes the trees that are dying aren't recognized by actually seeing these larvae themselves, but as they live beneath the bark. But what signs can residents be aware of if they're looking around the ash trees in their yard and might possibly have an infected one?
Oh, you're so right. They're very hard to detect. Even known trees that are infested are difficult to tell from other declining ash trees that aren't infested. One thing that is easy to notice is woodpecker damage. If you see a lot of woodpecker activity on the tree, sometimes that means it's feeding on the larvae. Other things that you'll notice on these infected trees that are different than other declining ash trees are splits in the bark. The larva feeds so much underneath the bark that it becomes loose and it'll split and break away from the tree. And the last thing you can notice by looking at the tree is inside the bark there'll be some S-shaped galleries, and they really look like an S, and those are the galleries that the larvae make as they're feeding, and they are often visible underneath those bark splits. And obviously if you see the adult beetle, that's another great sign. Okay.
Now you talked about residents can treat their trees. Is this actually medicating ash trees, or what does that mean?
Yeah, medicating could be. It will kill the insects within the tree. They're systemic chemicals. We prefer the ones that are done by professionals. They target the pests more closely as opposed to the things that are just poured on the ground that the tree takes up. But the insecticide moves throughout the tree and will kill the larva as it moves throughout the tree. The key to this is that the tree has to be fairly healthy in order to conduct that chemical throughout it. Remember, we talked about how the ash borer actually kills the trees. It disrupts the flow of water and nutrients throughout the tree. Mm-hmm. Well, those same tissues and that same conductivity is what needs to move the insecticide throughout the tree.
Okay, so it needs to be caught early.
Yes,
okay.
Early treatment is better.
Okay, well, one way that Hennepin and Ramsey counties have guarded against the spread of the beetle is through these quarantines. Explain that.
These quarantines help slow the spread of the insect. We know that we cannot get rid of them, so the key to managing it right now is just to slow the spread. So this keeps the wood and the insects within the quarantined areas.
Okay. Now that includes things like not moving firewood, taking firewood to the cabin, or mulch, things of that nature?
Correct.
Now, one thing that I've heard about emerald ash borer is that it would take years for them to move themselves from one quarantine area to another. They move very slowly. Is that the case? Is that they really do need that human transports?
Yes. Left to their own movement, they're only going to move to the next ash tree and keep going in that sort of pattern. They depend on humans to move them around like this. The other thing that is important that goes along with these quarantines is to not trim your trees during the active period. The Department of Agriculture calls it the no-fly period, and they recommend that you do not trim or remove or haul any ash wood during the summer months from April to September, and save that kind of work for the winter when the adults are dormant.
Okay. All right. Well, you know, the city's website has lots of information regarding emerald ash borer. Where would you direct people to learn more, including the city's website or elsewhere?
I would direct them to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. They have a lot of information. We get a lot of our information from them and take a lot of cues from them as far as managing this pest.
Okay, well, let's hope it stays out of Bloomington. We'd like to thank City Park Maintenance Supervisor Dave Hansen for being here with us today.